Hello, this is Eli at E30 Ernest in Star Trek Online. In this video, I'm going to cover some tips on how to effectively fly an exotic damage Sci-Torpedo. Now, this is only meant to be a guide to help you get some ideas on how to improve your flying. It is by no means the only way to fly builds such as these. It's just what works for me. I hope you'll find this video useful and help you enjoy Star Trek Online more. To make it easier to explain the basics behind flying Sci-Torp builds, I'm splitting this video into two parts. In the first part of the video, I'll cover exotic damage ability activations and timing. For that, I'll be using this ship, my Eternal, which is set up more as a pure exotic temporal ship. Just to show you, it doesn't even have any attack skills slotted. Later in the video, I'll cover Torp usage using my Pathfinder, which is a more traditional Sci-Torp build. I'll be adding timestamps in the video's description below so that you can skip through the parts that is more interesting for you. Also, for those interested in the full build, I'll be adding links to my Reddit posts in the video description below. Alright, now to start off, I'd like to cover how I set up my skill trays. Setting up your skill tray so that the skills can be efficiently reached and activated either by keybinds, manually through the number keys, or through your mouse is very important. In the middle of a firefight, the last thing you need is to be fumbling around your skill tray trying to find the ability you need. For me, I generally set up my trays so that the most used skills are in numbers 1 through 6. This makes it easier for me to reach with my hand since I don't use keybinds. I also use the mouse, especially when my left hand is too busy, such as when I'm in the middle of maneuvering my ship into position, or to activate the other skills that my left hand can't easily reach. For the Eternal, my skills are arranged this way. Starting off at the bottom row, I have Structural Integrity Collapse, which I usually open up with this one because it's not only a decent dot, but it also gives a good amount of damage resistance debuff against physical and kinetic. I have my Isokinetic Cannon, which is not exactly the best DPS tool, but it's pretty fun to use. Charge Particle Burst. Now this is a skill which I use a lot, especially with Tractor Beam Repulsors, because not only does it weaken shields, it also procs off my secondary deflector, which basically distributes a nice amount of radiation damage to everything around me. Over here I have my Molecular Deconstruction Beam, which is the nice ability these temporal ships get. Basically the temporal FU beam. And I have my pets, and one of my primary heals, or rather one of my oh crap abilities, Reverse Shield Polarity 1. Now even post S13, this is still a pretty decent emergency shield heal. It's not as OP as it was before, but it's still useful even at level 1. On the second row, I have, as I mentioned earlier, Tractor Beam Repulsors. I have it on key 1 because I use this a lot as a FAW analog. I don't have lots of beams here, and in cases where you have to hit some stuff behind you, this deals pretty decent damage to them. Over here is the Eternal's default console, the Causal Anchor. It's a decent AoE ability. It's not that powerful, but it's pretty decent. Over here I have Channel Deconstruction, the beginning of a string of temporal abilities. Channel Deconstruction builds entropy, and it sets up the rest of my temporal abilities. Entropic Redistribution is a pretty good nuke, even after the nerf. it's not uncommon for me to hit over 200,000 damage per shot with this one, so long as I've been able to build enough entropy using channel deconstruction. And it doesn't really consume the entropy either, it just distributes them around everything else and makes causal reversion, which is a heal that scales off entropy, all more powerful, and it's one of my primary hull heals at this point. And then here is another shield heal, transfer shield strength. Now you notice I have 2 shield heals because as a science ship, you get some decent amount of shields, even with the Iconian shield, which doesn't really have that much shield capacity. I have around 23,000 per facing. Alright, moving on to row 3. My bread and butter skills, as I call them. We have Gravity Well, which, even though it's dealing less damage than before, S13, it's still a really good skill. It helps set the rest up by bunching up mobs together. It sets them all up for a good SSV, or subspace vortex, and the stabilizing resonance beam. The stabilizing resonance beam not only debuffs the targets, it gives a good physical damage. It's a pretty good damage ability on its own, and then on top of that, it also procs a secondary deflector, which again deals more radiation damage. Here are 2 skills I just use during my quote-unquote alpha strikes. Anti-time entanglement singularity and the Delphic Tear. Now I have them here because all of these skills are set up through Gravity Well. Okay, moving on to the other end, I have my Psi Alpha buffs, which is Chromatic Energy Converter, Quantum Singularity Manipulation, and Scattering Field. Now, Scattering Field post S13 gets a good damage buff. It not only affects you, but it affects any teammate that is close enough to be inside your Scattering Field's effect. So it's a pretty good ability. Up here, I have the Biomolecular Shield Generator, Refracting Tetryon Cascade, and Sensor Scan. Again, these are abilities I just use maybe once or twice in an STF. In an ISA or in a CCA, it's just once. Up here, you have Brace for Impact, which is also a semi-decent heal for emergencies, and it also protects you against stuff like other torps, or mitigates damage from tractor beams, and other sources of kinetic damage. And here I have my diversionary tactics. Now, for the Eternal, I tend to switch on threatening stance on and off, depending on if I need additional cooldown reduction from Attrition Warfare 2. When I do have it off, I use diversionary tactics not only to shed threat, but it also provides a decent damage boost via the... Let's pull that up. I'm winging it. Of course, this is the wrong tree. Through Maneuver Warfare. It's a Cat 2 damage. It's 3% bonus all damage, and you can get up to 5 foes, so it's up to 15% Cat 2 damage. Alright, now here on the vertical ability tray, I have my Fleet Support and my Photonic Fleet. Now, I usually cast these two together. They go well hand in hand. I have Science Fleet here, which is a decent team buff. It helps rebuild your shields when you're getting too much threat. And here is threading stance. I explained earlier, sometimes I turn this on, sometimes I turn it off. You'll see it in the video later. Subnucleonic beam. Now, subnuke. Some people kind of underestimate this, but after S13, it's not only a PvP skill now, it's also a PvE skill, because it actually reduces a target's damage output. Now, against something big like the Board Queen or Board Pickle or Tech Cube, or stuff like the Implacable in Corfez, this is a pretty good way to avoid heavy hits coming your way, which is kind of useful because exotic damage builds like this one have a tendency to draw a lot of threat. It's not unusual for me to get over 50% attacks in a ISA. This is my constriction anchor. It's not a very powerful ability in terms of damage, but in stopping things dead on their tracks, it's pretty good. For example, in Corfez, when you have the Vodvar trying to get through the blockade, if some of them somehow avoid your gravity well, this is a good way to stop them from crossing that blockade. Now, the Temporal Negotiator I use as a emergency cooldown reduction ability. I generally don't need this because most of my skills go down to global anyway, but sometimes you just need an ability now, and this is a good ability to get that cooldown down faster. The trajectory jump, which is a ability coming from my warp core, is a decent teleport. See, it gets you from one point to another instantly. It's a good tractor beam escape ability, as well as, well, if you just need to reposition really quickly. This is the reactive armor catalyst. It's a battery. It's a good emergency heal, and the sensor interference platform. Now, this one I only use in the event that I am getting really pummeled, getting lots of threat. But if you have a dedicated tank in your team, please do not use this. It ruins their aggro management. Alright, now that I've covered my trace, a quick word on Sci DPS. Now I know some of you are interested in the DPS chasing aspect of the game. To a certain extent, I am as well. It's worth noting that a lot of powerful exotic damage abilities are AoE. The way DPS parses work is that they take all the damage you're dealing. So in the case of a AoE skill like Gravity Well, you'd want to get as many mobs as possible into its effect to get the maximum DPS. For example, if you grab well a single target and your Gravity Well deals 5,000 damage per tick, you're only going to do 5,000 DPS over that Gravel's duration as far as a parser is concerned. Now, if you gravel 10 NPCs and your gravel still deals that same 5,000 damage per tick, to the parser, you're effectively doing 50,000 DPS for the duration of that gravel. Now that is a pretty big difference. So now let's move on to skill activations, keeping in mind how Sci DPS works. Because of the long cooldowns of Psi abilities, I generally set up my EPG ship so that I have a set of really powerful AoE skills I can stack, and a set of less powerful AoEs or single target abilities I can use in between cooldowns. For most of my Psi builds, my primary attack is via Gravity Well, which bunches up NPCs for maximum DPS, and Subspace Vortex, and DRB. In between those, since those have a pretty substantial cooldown, I have my Torp spreads on my other ships, or in the case of this one, the Eternal, I have my Tractor Beam Repulsors, Deflector procs via Charge Particle Burst, and my temporal abilities. Now I just mentioned how Psi abilities have long cooldowns, so it's worth mentioning how important cooldown management or cooldown reduction is for these kinds of builds. Now, for an exotic build, uptime isn't really that important. It's not like energy builds where you always have fall or cannon scatter volley when you're trying to maximize uptime for those skills. What's more important is that your cooldowns are lined up so that you have your abilities when you need them and you're able to use them together to maximize their effectiveness. For example, the Stabilizing Resonance Beam has a shorter global cooldown than Gravity Well. However, DRB is also best used with Gravity Well, since Gravity Well will bunch up more enemies into DRB's AoE. So in my builds, I generally only lower cooldowns to the point where Gravity Well is at global, and stuff like DRB just becomes available alongside it. To illustrate how these abilities are used, I'm going to walk you through one of my post-Season 13 ISA videos. I am using ISA here because ISA is a pretty good analog for most of the game's SDFs. It also comes in distinct phases. You have the opening encounter with the attack cube and the initial spheres, the left transformer along with the cubes and the spheres that spawn on top of it, the first nanite sphere spawn, those spheres that go out of the gate and try to heal that transformer. Then after that, you have the right transformer, and then the right sphere spawn and the gateway. I tend to treat the right sphere spawn and the gateway as a single phase, and you'll see in the video why. And then you have the final attack cube. You'll see how I switch from my main AoE damage abilities and my secondary damage dealers, and how I generally manage cooldowns either through attrition warfare, temporal negotiator, etc. Well, alright, now off to that ISA video. Okay, as promised, here is the ISA video. Now, this is a pug run, so as you can see when we warp in, someone has already started without us. Just fine. Okay, so basically what I want to show here, this segment of the video, is how I alternate between my primary AoE abilities, which are Gravwell, SSV, and DRB, with my secondary abilities, which is TBR, my temporal abilities, and Charge Particle Burst. Now to start the ISA, I usually buff up my ship first to support config, which boosts up my exotic damage output, and then what I usually like doing for my exotic builds is I like to pull these spheres down to that cube. Like I said earlier, Sci DPS depends a lot on how many things you can get into your AoE. Now, dragging them into that cube would maximize the damage of SSV and DRB. So that's exactly what I'm doing now. I also used a exotic particle flood battery here to buff up my damage. And if you can see my build notes in the description below, I am using highly specialized. It's a trait that not only reduces temporal ability cooldowns when I use another temporal ability, but it also buffs exotic damage somewhat, so I am using that there as well. Okay, phase 1 done. Now, I am not a TAC officer, so I am not actually trying to get a GDF here. What I'm trying to do is get my hull down to 50% and use fleet support, which I failed. I did not get that because my ship has pretty thick shields and it just took that warp core breach. So right now I'm just using my photonic fleet and I have turned on threat stance. I turned on threat stance now because I want to use attrition warfare 2 to get my primary ability cooldowns ready for the nanite spheres to spawn. Okay, phase 2, I'm using my secondary set of skills. I'm going to use TBR for those generators, kind of like Fall. I am going to use channel deconstruction to build entropy, and when that entropy is built, I'll be using entropic redistribution, my isokinetic cannon. TBR up. I'm also using sensor scan, by the way, to build up damage here in the transformer. Okay, the cube has gone down, and the nanite transformer's health is starting to go down. There's only one generator left, and that's going down any second now. It's worth noting that for torpedo builds in general, torpedoes have travel time. It takes a lot of time for them to travel from your ship to your target. So with that in mind, when you're flying with beam boats like what I am right now, it's really important to fly slightly ahead of the entire team. Now, with experience, you're going to know when the transformer, when a target is going down like this. I know at this point that it's going down, so I start moving out. And now the spheres come out because that last generator is down. I use charge particle burst to proc radiation damage to all of them. So now I'm in a fire and forget mode. I have a radiation dot going on the nanite transformer. The spheres are getting damaged by radiation. I can move on. Right now, I am heading towards the next phase, which is the first set of nanite spheres. Because I was using attrition warfare too, and on this video, I'm actually using peak efficiency as well, which is a trait from the VOMF. Which basically reduces your bridge officer ability cooldowns every 5 seconds as long as your health is above 80%. So my primary set has cooldown. Again, stacking them again, Gravwell, SSB, and DRB. You can actually see on the real-time parser how everything just spikes up when they start stacking these skills. Okay, now here, my gravel has been cast, and I actually mistimed this, but there's only 1 second left on DRB, so at this point, I'm getting my hull down so I can cast my fleet support and so that I can get continuity. Now, continuity is a part of the temporal specialization tree. It basically resets the cooldown of your bridge officer abilities when you hit less than 10% hull. There you go. I mistimed it. I was hoping to get DRB down fast as well, but I didn't. So that's it's a mistake. Okay, now on the right transformer, it's basically a mirror of the left transformer. It's just the same thing all over again. But this time my hull is down pretty low, and I want to get that back up, so I am using a biomolecular shield generator to get my shields back up, as well as transfer shield strength. And I got here first before everyone else, so right now I know that the attack cube is going to attack me, so I turn off threat stance, which basically sets me up for the final phase, where I generally want to shed threat. Now what I'm trying to do now is try to keep my hull up above 80% so that I can get BRB ready for the final for the big alpha strike that I'm about to do. Okay, again, transformer is going down, and I'm going to move ahead of my team. Now in this next phase, most people would treat the spheres and the gate as separate phases. I like to treat them as one because right now I'm about to fully buff up on my psi abilities using chronometric energy converter, quantum singularity manipulation, and scattering field. Now fully buffed, these spheres won't last a single grav well. So what I like to do is cast gravel on the gate. Since my gravel is big enough that when it's fully buffed, it's going to pull all those spheres up to that gate. That way, I'm using my fully buffed Psi abilities against the gate and all the spheres, and hopefully take them all down at the same time. And here we go. You can see the spheres being pulled in. And the gate HP is going down. And they're all gone at the same time. At this point, it's just a tack cube, so I just try to get everything off cooldown as fast as possible. I use my temporal negotiator and just keep my hull up above 80% so that I could get that passive cooldown going. And at this point, it's just fire everything off cooldown. I mentioned earlier I went out of threat stance, and now diversionary tactics can be used as a damage buff, which I use now. It's not much at this point, it's just one tack cube, so it's just 3% cat 2 damage boost. But every little thing counts right now, so I just fire everything off. Yeah, hope for the best. Tack cube goes down. And there we go. So, down to the parse. What I like looking is, I like checking first is the damage spikes, the damage chart. You clearly see where I've been stacking my gravel, SSV, and DRB. You have the initial phase here, the first 10 seconds. I'm actually spiking about 300k, I think, single damage, and then up to the second set of the second primary the second time I use my primary skills, which I am spiking above 400,000 at this point. And then my big Psi Alpha Strike, which I am hitting almost a total of 1 million damage. Now when you smooth that over to see the DPS chart, you can see those spikes as well. You have the initial encounter, use my Gravel, SSV, and DRB. The second set of spheres, DRB, Gravel, and SSV again. And then the final Alpha Strike, the gate, and the other spheres. So you can see here that it's really important for side builds to get as many NPCs into those big AoE abilities as much as you can. Don't waste your Gravwell on single targets. Don't use it on the transformer. Please don't. It's not wise to do that. I know some people like doing that because it pads their numbers, but it's not something that I recommend, especially in a bug environment where you don't know when if everyone can actually take care of the transformer in time before the nanite spheres come in. All right. Next up, we're gonna look at the Torps. Now we're at my trusty Pathfinder. Let's talk Torps. To famously quote Porticus, Torps are hard. Well, not really. It's just practice. Anyone can get to learn how to fly Torps. Now, as you see in my skill bar, my skill tray, all my Psi abilities are basically in the same place as my Eternal. My Gravity Well, SSV, and DRB are mostly in the same spot. Same with my big Sci buffs. I'm keeping it consistent between ships because they are similar enough that I can get away with a similar skill tray. So it allows me to switch between ships and just activate abilities on muscle memory. It doesn't really screw up with your head when you start switching ships. But the main difference here is that for my secondary damage, I have my tactical buffs. Now, let's take a look at them now. I have a single copy of Tactical Team 1, which is brought down to Global via Con duty officers. I have 2 copies of Torpedo Spread. Now, I do not have any items or traits set in this build that would be enough to bring down my Torp spreads to global cooldown. So I am forced to rely on 2 copies to ensure that I have a Torp spread ready every 15 seconds. I could use Attrition Warfare, but the Pathfinder isn't a very tanky ship and doesn't really fare that well under threat. Now I also have a single copy of Torpedo High Yield. Having a high yield available to me opens up some options, which is good in various STFs. Sometimes it's more beneficial to use a high yield. Now I fire my torpedoes manually, primarily because I, first of all, am using different kinds of torps. And each torp has their strengths and weaknesses. Some torps are better used under torp spread, some of them are better used under high yield, and some of them can do well on all of those modes. And some do well even when fired normally, normal single shots. I have here a staple of most EPG Sci-Torp builds, which is the particle emissions plasma torp. It has a 100% chance to spawn a plasma cloud, which is buffed by exotic damage. Um, Whether you fire it normally, under torp spread, or high yield, those clouds are coming out. I also have a gravimetric photon torpedo, which spawns gravimetric rifts that are once again buffed by EPG and other sources of exotic damage boosts. But this one only has a 33% chance of spawning the rifts under normal fire. On torp spread, however, that chance increases to 100%. So just right off the bat, between these 2 torps, gravimetric torpedo gets the priority for torp spread. So you can see on the ISA video later on that most of my torp spreads are used with the gravimetric torp. The plasma torp does well on torp spread as well, don't get me wrong. But the plasma cloud has a big enough radius that if I grav well a set of NPCs, all of them will be within the effect of that plasma cloud. So even under normal shots, this can deal some decent damage. Now on the 3rd torp up front, I have the Delphic Distortion Torpedo. Now this one deals a decent amount of damage as well, but it also comes with a damage resistance debuff. I find that between torp spread and high yield, this one works better on high yield. The salvos just get better damage versus the torp spread version. Now on the rear, I like keeping a torp at the back because, as I mentioned earlier on the Eternals run, it's always a good idea to start moving slightly ahead of the team. Now having a torp in the rear means that I can shoot backwards at a target while I'm moving away from it and towards my next target. And the neutronic torpedo still packs a punch. It's still a great torp, and it's great for my aft torp tubes. Now, contrary to what some people believe, the radiation damage component of the neutronic torpedo is not exotic. Therefore, it's not buffed by EPG, nor is it buffed by exotic damage bonuses. It's fine though, because the neutronic torp, in conjunction with the binaural shell pack, buffs radiation damage, which is good for my secondary deflector. Now, for cooldown management on the Pathfinder, I mentioned I am not using attrition warfare, just because this isn't really a good ship for taking in damage. It's a bit squishier than the Eternal. So I am using a trait called Astrometric Synergy, which I do not have slotted at the moment. Basically, whenever you slot in a Torp spread or a high yield, it brings down Psi cooldowns down. And basically, just with that, I am able to bring things down to global. You'll see that later on an ISA video. And speaking of said video, might as well go to it. Alright, here we go with an ISA. Again, I am using ISA because it's a good analog for all of their STFs, and it comes in distinct phases where you could basically see how the pattern in which I run my Sci abilities versus my Torps. This is a pug run again, so off to start, I'm heading off ahead of them this time. Haha. Just like earlier, the Eternal, I buff up with a battery. This time, I buff up with a kinetic amplifier battery. I open up again with a gravel to pull down all the spheres into the cube to get the most out of my Torp spread, which is a gravimetric Torp spread, and my SSV and DRB. Now the Pathfinder is set up with slightly less control expertise than the Eternal, so you can see that there's a slight hesitation in pulling down those spheres into the cube. But it's fine. I still have enough range. They still all got pulled in. They're still good. Now I'm running command frequencies on this build, so I'm able to cast my fleet support and my photonic fleet, even though my hull is not less than 50%. So I cast them up here in front of the gate. Now I am flying a little bit towards the center of this transformer, center and below. Reason being is that when I fire my next set of gravimetric torpedo spreads, I want to hit the two nanite generators and take them out, hopefully with just that one shot, and try to hit that tac cube above that transformer. As I mentioned earlier, when it comes to DPS, when using AoE skills, the more things you hit, the more damage you get. And even though you're not chasing DPS, the more things you hit per skill usage gets you a better efficiency in taking out those targets. Here we go. Alright, you can see my Torp spread is right on point. I'm going to hit the two generators, and I have some Torps flying off into that tac cube. Just like the Eternal, I'm using my tractor beam repulsors like Fire at Will to take out targets that are out of my torpedo's arc. Now, some of you might be wondering, I'm shooting at the transformer, which is a single big target. Why am I using another Torp spread? Basically, I want to try to hit the other spheres as well. It's just more efficient that way. I could use a high yield and just hit the transformer for bigger shots toward the transformer, but then we might end up with spheres that are still living at the end of the run. Now, Astrometric Synergy, which, oh, and by the way, I am also running AHOD, All Hands on Deck. So Astrometric Synergy and All Hands on Deck has brought down my main Sci ability cooldowns down, so I am able to once again stack them, Gravel, SSV, and DRB, and then another Torp spread. Now, I am firing off a Torp spread of gravimetric photon Torps. Now, it's also good to run a torp spread of particle emission plasma torpedoes, but on a Gravwell bunch like this one, a single pep torp is enough to get them all within that nice plasma cloud. Crossing over quickly using evasive maneuvers. At this point, just like the Eternal, I am trying to get my hull down to proc continuity. Now I'm not running threatening stance here, so continuity would teleport me backwards. So later on you'll see me use my trajectory jump to get back into the fight. Also, I am, once again, like the other transformer, this phase is basically a mirror of that. I am lining up so that my torp spread would again hit the 2 nanite generators and hopefully the tac cube. And there you go. Teleport backwards, teleport forwards. Healing up. And using tractor beam repulsors again, like Flaw. Now the transformer is going down pretty quickly. I know it's safe to move on to the next set, which is the gate. Now, unbuffed, my Gravwell wouldn't be enough to pull these spheres back to the gate, but since quantum singularity manipulation adds a huge chunk of control X, I am able to pull them up to the gate as well. Not as fast as the Eternal. As you can see here, there's some hesitation between them. But using diversionary tactics for the additional damage boost also lessens their resistance to control, and they are just pulled into the sphere there. Again, like the Eternal, I took the gate and the spheres as a single phase and took them out at the same time. Well, mostly at the same time. Now on the tac cube, just like the Eternal, it's fire everything. I made a mistake here. I should have buffed with a battery earlier in the gate, but I did not. Okay, this is a point where I switch to high yields. I noticed that the shields on the stack cube is going down on my side. So I buff up with a high yield and start firing off high yields. Now I'm running torpedo barrage, so I'm getting extra high yields whenever I fire a high yield. Now with the shields down, even those destructible torps get to hit a pretty nice big wallop. And that's that. Going to the parse. Again, on the damage chart, you can see the spikes. The initial spike, over 200k. On the next nanite spheres, a bit over 400k. And on the final nanite sphere spawn at the gate, I am doing close to 1.1 million, above 1.1 million damage. But that's mostly because I'm also using torps. Going to the damage breakdown. You can see how my use of the secondary deflector has my use of charge particle burst and DRB in conjunction with abilities like Gravwell to bunch everything up means that my radiation procs are dealing a substantial amount of damage, about 17,900 here. My gravimetric rift from my grav torp spreads are doing 12,000. Now remember, I have been firing my plasma particle emission torpedoes normally. It's still dealing a decent amount of damage at 8,000 DPS. Now if I swapped over and used my grav torps normally and prioritize my torp spreads for my plasma torps, it's gonna be substantially less. I mean, it's only going to have a 33% chance of proccing grav rifts, so this one would go pretty low. This might go slightly up, in my experience, in the 10 to 12,000 range, so I'd be losing DPS. Again, my use of high yield means the Delphic Distortion Torpedo actually dealt A decent amount of DPS, just 1.8 thousand damage, but has a pretty good max one hit of 142,000. By waiting for the shields on the attack cube to go down before firing off my high yields, I also got a pretty decent max one hit of 218,000 from the Plasma Torp, which, when you think about how this ship doesn't have any tac consoles, nothing buffing torpedo damage by itself, is pretty good. And that's about it. I hope you learned something from this video. I know I've been rambling on a bit. I hope some of the things I mentioned would be useful to you, and I hope that you get a lot of fun flying your own Sci builds. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below. And if you like this video, it's my first time talking in a video, so pardon my informalness over all this. And, I just hate hearing my voice. I don't usually do this, but if you like this, please like and subscribe. And that's about it. See you in game.